Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this week's episode of the Coworking Values Podcast, the sweetest smelling co-working podcast in the world. And this is the third in our series of podcasts based around Black Lives Matter and inclusion and diversity. And I'm still, the further we get into this journey, I'm still not sure how we've managed to give it that saccharine term of inclusion and diversity like a policy, when really we should have been anti-racist all along. And as I've said in different places, I am learning how to be anti-racist, even though I am married to someone not from my country and thought I knew about this stuff and had read all the right books. As this topic has been thrust out into the public consciousness.
This episode is brought to you by Cobot, a leading management software for co-working spaces, office hubs, and flexible workspaces around the world. One of the best things about Cobot is that it is produced by people who manage a co-working space and know the ins and outs of the main problems and issues bugging co-working managers. So if you want more time for your coworkers and community, check out Cobot at cobot.me and take your co-working management to the next level.
One, I'm absolutely fucking amazed at some of the things people are saying in retaliation to this movement. And then I'm also overjoyed at the massive response that we've had to people writing into this podcast and seen in the media and stuff like that. And, this podcast is about co-working, and me and a lot of people connected to this podcast, scrambling around to find someone who could say, what do we actually do in our co-working space other than liking Instagram posts from Chuck D? And I was on our Indyhall Brain Trust call with Alex and Marcella and lots of people. I can't remember their names now. And he said, what have you been doing at Indyhall? And I said, oh, can you talk about that? And he said, no, but Anaia can. And here we are. So Anaia, what are you known for, and what would you like to be known for at this moment in time?
Oh my goodness. I don't know what I'm known for. I'm not sure that I'm known. So maybe it's one answer to both questions. I'd love to be known for using techniques of participatory learning to make everybody's life easier that I come in contact with.
That's a good answer. So that's kind of what we're going to do today. And before we go on, even with friends I've been talking about with race and stuff for ages, I'd be more happy skydiving naked into a shopping centre than I would be talking about some aspects of this. And how do you feel about that? Is it? Are you really cool about this, or is this momentarily awkward as we unpick 400 years of life?
It's definitely not comfortable. Maybe awkward's not quite the right word, but it's definitely uncomfortable. But something that I've personally been really trying to commit to and trying to make a lifetime's worth of commitment to in the past couple of weeks is how to kind of make peace with that discomfort is just really a part of this, and discomfort's just not that big of a deal. I'd like to be making bigger sacrifices where discomfort is not the worst thing that I experience.
Yeah. I know that. I think I mentioned it every podcast. Is my son's best friend from nursery. So he's 9 now. So his best friend at school and nursery is 9. His mother is Nigerian and his father is Ghanaian, and they're British black people. They're third generation here. And a few years ago, he said, "Oh yeah, I'm going to have the talk with Nathan." What do you mean the talk? Is that about the birds and the bees? He goes, "No, all black parents have to have a talk with their kid about, if they ever do something, if ever they're, involved with the police. It's stand still, be good." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I was absolutely, we live in pretty near the centre of London. I was absolutely amazed that it never occurred to me that someone I knew would be in that situation. And I actually, why I say that is because I felt awkward. I didn't know. He was like, "Everyone knows that, don't you?" I'm like, So before I tangent on my endless stream of anecdotes, so in Indyhall, you sat around, you instigated this, like, let's talk about anti-racism and how, and correct me if I'm wrong here, how to develop a very anti-racist community. And my understanding is that, and correct me if I'm wrong here again, is that, Indyhall is pretty white and Philadelphia is a pretty black city. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah.
So even with, and people from Indyhall have been on this podcast, even with everything you do, you still manage to end up with a building full of white people. And I guess that was one of the things that instigated what you're doing.
Absolutely.
So just talk us through the process as if you're, standing in front of a class and going, well, boys and girls, here's what we're going to do today. So my hope is, and we can hack it together because we did no preparation for this podcast, and then other than send an email, is, if I'm a community manager in any co-working space, primarily, in Europe, how can I go about getting this conversation going, which I imagine, and why we touched on the awkwardness at the beginning of this podcast, is people may feel awkward doing it.
Absolutely. So 3 weeks ago, things started really popping off in Philadelphia. Following the murder of George Floyd, things started protests and police brutality in retaliation for protests, as well as what we'll call looting and rioting, even though I have some conflict with those terms, all over the country and absolutely in Philadelphia as well. And something that really kicked me into gear is the conversation the conversation started amongst our members, at least amongst our members in a public forum, which is our Slack community. People hopped online and talked about how scared they were to see all of this property destroyed. And I don't want to overly critique that because I've lived in Philadelphia my whole life. It was absolutely scary and upsetting to see property destroyed. But for that to start the conversation with truly no mention of police brutality, even at all, not even to mention, the specifics of what led up to this most recent outbreak of kind of public outcry in response to police brutality. And this unfolded over, there have been protests pretty consistently for the past 3 weeks, but that first weekend was a very dramatic and public one, whereas since then, I don't think the protests have been getting as much publicity. But we, the Indyhall team, kind of had a very quick conversation that Sunday night of, okay, we're going to throw out everything we were thinking about this following week. Unscheduling all of our emails, our weekly announcements email, changing up how we do social media, basically just pressing pause on everything, including a pretty big event that was supposed to be that Friday. Because we need to take time to be intentional about how we represent ourselves as a team, as a community right now, which I think is kind of the bare minimum. And I will say that Indyhall as a community, as we've already said, is primarily white to a huge degree. And my first priority was feelings of comfort and safety of the very, very few Black people who are a part of our community. And for my part, that feeling resulted in an email that I sent out to everybody, which I think was the Wednesday after the Sunday that the Indyhall team had this kind of conversation of, all right, we're pressing pause. We got to rethink our next steps. And I just voiced the discomfort that I felt of seeing those how the conversation played out over a member forum, and how I felt pushed to the margins of my community by that discussion, because there were multiple people having this discussion and very few people really responding to it in the moment. And I really understand now that I'm choosing to give everybody the benefit of the doubt. I'm choosing to trust everybody's intentions because they're a part of my community. And I think that that's a really important starting place. And like, I can't go into wanting to make space for people if I don't trust them, essentially. But I just very publicly stated, like, that sucked. I hated that. And I know I'm not alone in that. And as painful as that was for me to experience as an ally, it very reasonably could have been a lot worse to experience as just a member of our community. I am an ally, but I'm also in a position of authority in this community where, as much as we don't put a hierarchy between ourselves as the team and the members, like the fact that I have everybody's email and I have everybody's attention, I have more access to conversation amongst everybody in the community, which is a huge deal. I don't really have to introduce myself anymore.
There's two things you said there. Is one about having more access to the conversation, which I think is something that both owners, operators, and community managers can. I don't want to say power, but can instigate things. And also, can you explain the term ally? Because that's been, if you're paying attention, that's being used a lot. But if you're not paying attention, what's the difference between an ally and maybe you could say a sympathizer?
That's a great question. I think a lot of people and in other communities that I've been a part of, that ally and sympathizer have actually really meant the same thing. And accomplice is like kind of the new version of what ally should mean. Because honestly, when I think about ally, I think about actually, I wonder how many Europeans were kind of aware of this. But after Trump was elected, there was this thing of wear a safety pin visibly, like pin a safety pin to yourself so that people, when looking at you, know that essentially that you didn't vote for Trump, but also that you're an ally and that you disapprove strongly of all of this, all these racist antics.
Was that part of the resist movement? There was a lot of stuff about resist when Trump arrived.
Yeah, I really do not know how the safety pins thing kind of related. I think that ally is kind of the most general term we have to describe somebody who is willing to actually do something in their personal life to move towards a more peaceful and just world for people who experience things different than what the ally is. So you can be an ally. A straight person can be an ally to queer people. A white person can be an ally to people of color. So it's, caring very, very generally, caring about things that do not have immediately affect your personal life. And when you take that farther, what I think it should mean is somebody who's willing to challenge ideas of racism and ideas that keep marginalized people marginalized in systemic and cultural ways, being willing to challenge that and actually make personal sacrifices to meet those challenges.
Yeah, there's been a few conversations, like very light conversations. It's not like I've stood up in a train station and you know put myself at personal physical risk, but I just drawn attention to shortcomings in certain things that are going on, and I felt just before bringing it up, I would rather give myself an electric shock than actually say what I'm about to say. And then when I said it, people have gone, "Oh yeah, you're right." And then they've said, "Oh, but we can't really do anything about it right now. But I know you're right." And then but I've already opened the gate, so I'm like, "Well, you probably could if you wanted to, you know." And I feel a bit of a shithead for saying that because I think making people wrong is not the way to go about this. And just because I think I'm saying perfect, I things come out my mouth in completely the wrong order, as many people listening to this will know. And if you make someone wrong, you're kind of not getting anywhere. But it's so I don't know. You think of all this, think of all the the classic heroic stories you hear of people putting themselves at massive personal risk, and it is not a lot to ask in the big scheme of things in your group of friends, is what I'm saying.
Totally. Right. And there's a starting place for everybody. And it's a different starting place for everybody because we all have different tools at our disposal. And that's actually, this is a really good time to share a quote because I've been speaking for myself for far too long already in this. This is by Courtney Ariel, who's a writer. And I found an article that she wrote years ago, unfortunately still extremely relevant. And it's called For Our White Friends Desiring to Be Allies. And in this, she very tenderly calls in a lot of calling in versus calling out. Like calling in is another, what I tried to do in my email as well, of calling somebody out with the intention of keeping them within the community in a way versus like cancel culture and calling out of excommunicating somebody or canceling them or whatever. So she has a lot of very, very kindly written critique for white people who desire to be allies. And this quote I actually put into my email that I sent to everybody at Indyhall. Above all, I urge you, keep trying. You're going to make mistakes. Expect this. But keep showing up. Be compassionate. Lead with empathy always. Keep learning and growing. If you do this, I truly believe you'll be doing the work of an ally. And that's a pretty low bar. There is truly, if somebody feels they can't do that, then they might need some help. And I think that's a role of leadership in co-working communities, is making yourself available for that help. But that's a really, really reasonable of anybody desiring to be an ally. Keep trying, expect to make mistakes, and exist in those mistakes as well. And like, that's what we were talking about earlier. Like, this is so uncomfortable and we're so scared of making mistakes, but we're just not going to avoid them. And avoiding them shouldn't really even be the goal because we're going to recover from these mistakes. And recover having learned something new. And it's really, I don't know, yeah, kind of lost my train of thought, but I think that quote is very relevant.
We will put that in the show notes for sure. And so, what did you do as a community to get to that Google Doc? How did you get everyone to start throwing in and sharing what they thought, and manage the, I mean, it's not like a Ben Shapiro Twitter stream where you have to manage that level of horrificness. But how did you guide people there?
Well, the team really, we put ourselves, we led by example, I'll say. we started by sharing our personal experiences, just in that our personal experience of that couple of days leading up to this document being born. And we really explained the context for the document as something very specific and very Indyhall and very relevant to our members specifically. Like, we were not trying to, we did not present it as this is the end all be all. This is the only document you ever need to read or engage with to be anti-racist. Like, it was very explicitly, this is a starting point for us all. And as a community, we really value co-learning, and we really value teaching each other stuff and learning from each other. So with that history, we kind of plugged this into that history of, this is something we already do really well, is learn from each other. And as a team, we set the expectation, again, very reasonable, of trying to get rid of every barrier to entry. So part of that was making the document very functional and readable, and being really intentional about formatting and the way the information is organized. So you don't have to read the entire thing. You can kind of jump to a part that's most relevant for you. Making the information as accessible as possible was a big part of our role in it. And that's something that we do a lot, is kind of giving every tool we possibly can to the community and letting them kind of run with it. And our role is to lead by example. So we added our own resources to the document before we showed it to anybody. So that there was it wasn't just a blank page for people to pour their thoughts and feelings onto.
And did you go around and, like, this is what I do, so maybe you're more sophisticated than me, is like go around and say to people, "Oi, you, I'm going to let this document out, and when I do, make sure you put something in it, because otherwise it would just be us three." Did you instigate contributions, or did it just happen organically?
I would more on the organic side. We definitely encourage people, and I think in other cases, in other, not working on this document, but also getting people to engage with something brand new, we absolutely do that. We absolutely, like, I don't want to say chase people down, but we make very, very specific invitations for people to contribute. But for this particular document, I mean, that felt not right, because what the version of that with this particular document would be reaching out to the very, very few people of color in our community, particularly even fewer Black people in our community, and asking them to kind of educate the rest of us on, which was really, we wanted to avoid that very specifically. So in this case, we did not chase people down. We did make it very clear that we did not want this to just be a document for allies to contribute to. We made it very clear that there was space and time for people to voice their emotions. That's another important point. So the document is very practical. The document is very, if X, then Y. If you are an employer, here are resources, here are ways you can use the tools of an employer to do anti-racist work right now. If you're an employee, here are some things you could consider doing. If you are a designer, look at these options you have, stuff like that. So it was very, and that was super intentional. We wanted it to be actionable. But we need space for emotional conversations as well. So Alex has been running these. They're they're not group therapy. It really sounds like group therapy. He is not a therapist. It is not group therapy. But we have been having more roundtable kind of very, very emotional discussions ever since COVID. So there was, again, already a kind of existing framework for an emotional discussion, but we did super intentionally separate the emotional discussion and the kind of actionable discussion, which I think benefited everybody.
So I was going to ask, how do you think, or did you, not how do you think, but like, can you say something about how the energy changed when everyone started talking about this openly in the community, or did it not change at all? And also I'm dying to ask, can you say something about like it all being online at the moment? Because your space is closed but is active online. So how do you think that all the energy and the dynamics played out?
Yeah. I imagine every single person experiencing it probably had a different experience. But for me, it was pretty. It really put a bad taste in my mouth. Maybe other co-working operators can relate to this, but I think there are times where we are really forced to represent the space and the business and the organization before we represent ourselves. And that was, I mean, I'll just say again, it was so, it still weighs heavy on me. It like broke my heart a little bit to see how the discussion played out. And it still hurts. It literally hurt my feelings. And there were very, very few Black people engaging in the discussion. Again, like we don't have many Black people who are members of Indyhall, proportionally at least. And I could just read, like the emotions were so palpable, and everybody was so raw. Everybody was feeling raw, whether they were more concerned about police brutality or more concerned about a broken window. People were scared. People were feeling extremely vulnerable. And people were also pretty clearly feeling like they didn't know how to interact with each other in the Indyhall community, which is not something that I think is so common. I think we're really lucky that people, especially in our online space, where we have people all over the country, all over the world, a part of our online community. So people who will never meet face to face ever, probably, treat each other like old friends. And this kind of melted that just into nothing. And people, we had people saying, I don't understand why this conversation has taken this turn. Multiple people said really explicitly, like, I want to speak my mind, but I don't think that would be welcome right now. Or I want to speak my mind, but I am scared for what backlash I could get, for how I think my feelings will be perceived. And then we had people going, this is kind of bullshit. I don't know, like, why are we talking about broken windows? Like, it was a very.
I've had a similar, like, two communities I'm part of online, and one is, and this is one of those things where I'm feeling awkward saying it. One is like, it's about marketing and business, but there's a lot of, it's very white and it's very Christian. So it's not unhospitable, but it is definitely very white and Christian. And this huge wave of, Black Lives Matter is so important came out of it. And I don't think anyone disagreed with making Black Lives Matter a prominent part of that whole conversation. And there was a move by the organisers to say, okay, we're going to make this course here, and we're going to limit it to 40% white men, and then everything else has to be, everything else. I say that in air quotes for a bit of joke, that's how deadly serious you are about it. So it's actually the complete opposite. So I don't want to say complete opposite, but it was, it went way better than my own prejudice towards people like me that are white Christian men thought it would go. And then in another one, in another community, I won't go into all the details because we're here forever, but there were 800. It's a Facebook group that's attached to a paid course about building community, and there were 897 comments on this Facebook post where someone called someone out about their language, and the way people went in. And after a while, there's always like a few people that rise to the top. The way people went in, and it really stirred up a lot of feelings. And I put something in there saying, listen, aren't we a community about building community and we're acting like this? And it kind of went silent. Whether that was because I wasn't a big enough part of that, I don't know. But it was unbelievable how people. I don't want to say how people act because I'm not picking on their behaviour, but what it churns up, and it's sort of highlighted for me, and do comment is how you think, or how I thought I saw things from people's perspective, but I actually have less idea of their perspective than I thought I had, and imagine what everyone else is like when they get together. I'm not sure what you can do with that, but there we go.
Yeah, I'm by complete coincidence, a couple of days before George Floyd was murdered, I rejoined Instagram, which I had been off for a couple of years. And that's pretty much the only other online community, although I wouldn't even really call it that I'm a part of besides the Indyhall one. And wow, the difference was pretty incredible. And it did make me think about something. I got called out on Instagram because I follow very few people. I don't have many followers. But I got kind of swept into, I got to post about it. And I wasn't called out specifically like by name, but there was this discussion about like contributing to an echo chamber. Ooh, are you okay? Contributing to an echo chamber is really useless. And that kind of pushed me to be more honest with the Indyhall community about how I was feeling about how the discussion was going up until we as a team we took a bit more control of the reins, I think.
I know Kofi, who's a couple of podcasts before this one, but I think we might have been said in the podcast. I just said, so how do I do this thing? He goes, just liking and tweeting and and Instagramming and saying, this is terrible. Is like a dopamine hit. It's not actually action. And I was like, so you mean I can just you mean I can't just share a picture and go back to my coffee? So no, you have to do something. And I'm a bit confused about. Obviously we're doing this podcast and there's stuff we're already active about in London, but actually doing something is really it's really hard work to work out what to do and where to plug in. So where's the community in the conversation now, and where would you like it to go, and what could what's your key takeaways for fellow Tumblrs, community managers and owners in this whole new learning curve for us?
Sure. Well, the conversations died down quite a bit, although in the public forums, I'll say, it's less of a discussion amongst people, the Slack channel. There's less, even though there are still protests happening, people are not posting about them so much. people are still contributing to the document, which is great. I will say that not to get ahead of myself, but for a barrier to entry is making everything synchronous and live. And it's really important. Like, even though we held a live discussion, that was not the only way to contribute to the document, and making really detailed guides for people who want to contribute can't just be done in like one live event that's then is over. Something that's kind of the document and the brainstorm sparked a collaboration, a more meaningful extension of a collaboration that's already existed. Rec Philly is another space in Philadelphia, which everybody everywhere should support. But they are mostly Black community, Black owned, and the space is somewhat like co-working. It's more targeted towards artistic industries, performance industries. So they have writers, musicians, poets, designers, and many, many, many other kinds of creative folks are part of that community. And they've been fundraising for microgrants. So they're partnering with a bunch of different organizations to raise up as much money as possible and then Rec will be distributing the money that these other organizations raise on their behalf. So Indyhall's been partaking in that. We're also trying to raise up some hours, some one-on-one professional expertise hours, totally separate from the micro grants, just as to try and build some relationships between our communities, because there's a handful of folks who are members of both, and they were actually really essential. Their input was totally, we could not have figured all this out without that input. So we're raising hours, a minimum of 1 hour for somebody who has valuable skills to share, which is something that I don't know. I hope this is widespread, but certainly at Indyhall, the way people are so free with their labor and their expertise is incredible. I mean, I've gotten help with my taxes, health insurance, professional development stuff, like how to ask for a raise, how to rewrite my resume, like all this stuff that they could have been charging me a lot of money for. And I only got it because of my connection to Indyhall. And so we're trying to, we're trying to spread that out as much as we can. And so the conversation has kind of shifted from what can all of us do no matter what? What are the things, how do we as individuals like participate in personal, more personal action to this is what Indyhall is asking you to do specifically. These are the things that we have we've done the work to come up with these things. We've made it really easy for you to participate. And now we need you to participate. We urge you to participate. And part of that is, I think, again, my number one thing that I will pass on to other people who are considering doing this work is, I think the bulk of our work is removing barriers to entry. So as I've spoken about before, that's making sure the document is extremely easy to navigate, extremely easy for people to read, putting the work into actually organizing data if it's data, to make sure that it's accessible, making sure that there's multiple ways to participate. So it's not just you show up at the same place at the same time, and that's your only opportunity to be heard. Making sure that we make very, very, very specific asks of people when the projects are led by Indyhall or by community leadership. So making sure that people know exactly what they're being asked to do, exactly how to do it, and exactly what the consequences of their help will be. And then also things like matching funds. So we're raising money for micro grants that will be distributed by Rec Philly. And Alex has started off with matching smaller donations. So he was matching donations under $25 made by community members up to $250. And then we had another member step up to do the exact same thing. So she'll contribute $250 out of matching funds for people's donations under $25, if that makes sense. So using the tools.
Does that mean that if everyone gives in, if 500 people give £1, the amount going forward will be 1,000.
Yes.
Or $1. Sorry, I really confused myself there. Sorry to take up so much time on this podcast with doing my maths in my head. And where will that? Just clarify where that. We'll go with that. We'll go to the is it Rack Philly co-working space?
Yeah, Space for Creatives, I think, is there. I'm not sure if they really identify with a co-working space, but it's definitely it's pretty comparable. But yes, so Rec Philly is raising money for micro grants, and the micro grants, as they explained it to us, the micro grants are really coming from specific organizations. So like Indyhall, for example, our micro grants are available to folks who identify as entrepreneurs or want to start their own business within 6 months. Or we've made it pretty general, but the point is targeting people who are interested in entrepreneurial exploits. Although some other organizations will say, our bucket of money that is being distributed as micro grants is available to folks who are artists or writers, even more specifically, or single parents or what have you. So REC is this kind of big umbrella, and they've been using their resources and their connections as an organization to reach out to other kind of friendly organizations around, I think, mostly locally in Philadelphia, although I'm not sure about that, to do fundraising amongst their own communities, or some organizations are just flat out donating on behalf of the organization. I know Indyhall, we're fundraising and we're matching some funds, but the money's really coming from our community in our case.
That is great. I'm gonna wrap up there, and everything. When we finish recording, I'm gonna come back and get you for show notes. So there's a lot of resources and links and action points that we've referenced in this, and we'll put in our show notes. We'll put links to that, and like we both said in here, that there's a lot to read, but I would urge people to go and make the time to read these links. Not every single link, that would be nuts, but to get an understanding of perspective, and see why this is such an important topic. Because I personally, I've seen I follow a lot of things, and I didn't quite realize what Black Lives Matter was about until recently, and I thought I was a well-informed citizen, and it's amazing what you don't know. You don't know what you don't know, and I think what's even worse is you think you know, and then you have to do the work and get in there. So, where's the best place to find you online?
Anybody can just email me. It's my first name, Anaia @indyhall.org.
Okay. Thank you very much for jumping in here. This is the most time we've ever spent together in our lives. I appreciate you sharing. It's always great to hear from someone who's in the trenches or in the Zoom, working it all out. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you go to the coworkingassembly.eu, that's the website of the European Co-working Assembly, and at the top there's a little thing that says sign up to our newsletter, and we send every week we send a roundup of the content we produce, the events we're doing with people we know within the European Co-working Assembly. Anti-racism, inclusion and diversity is a massive topic. It's been a emerging topic that's been supported by a lot of people in the Co-working Europe conference event and people around. You can hear about the Co-working Library and the podcast we do here, and European Freelancers Week, which is probably one of the biggest movements. That is going to be huge this year, mainly because it's online and we have a greater capacity and because we can't afford a stadium. But we'd love you taking part, and we particularly, particularly the last 3 podcasts, if you know someone that has a story to tell or a practice to share about how to address, combat, keep the conversation alive around anti-racism and co-working, we'd be absolutely delighted to hear from you. So get involved, please. Thank you very much. Say goodbye, Anaia.
See ya. Anaia.
Anaia. I knew I'd get it wrong. Bye.
Bye.